Guys, welcome back to the Peak Performance Podcast. We are joined today from the motherland by the very handsome, now officially retired ex-cricketer, one of the best mindfulness coaches I've ever dealt with in my life, founder of Mind Strong Sport. Louis, how are you, mate?
All good.
That's good.
Officially retired. Like, that's the first time weird someone saying that. Like, I mean, I was retired once and now I'm retired twice.
Mate, as I said, I've worked with you in a range of settings. First of all, I was very fortunate to be able to be your S&C coach at the Darren Lehman Academy. And then we've crossed over on a number of other occasions, particularly with your work in the mindfulness space. We can sort of dive into that a little bit more today. How did you get into it? And let me just say that I love the depth and the breadth of the work that you do in this space, because I'll be transparent in saying, as I sort of alluded to before, there are some instances where I've seen, quote unquote mindset coaches maybe on social media who are a bit flaky and provide very surface level, non-tangible things. But with you, I just love, the actionable, way you go about your coaching and what the results I've seen you achieve with your athletes as well. But yeah, give us a quick little insight into how you got into this space, mate.
Yeah, appreciate it. I mean, mindset coaching, like you said, it can be kind of seen as this fluffy, esoteric. It doesn't really mean anything. But I sort of really, having finished my master's or finishing my master's now in performance psychology, like it's not being you just can't call yourself a psychologist. But at the end of the day, how I transitioned so weirdly into it was just through people talking. And I finished my career as a professional cricketer, so in 2016, and then once that had finished, I was like, right, what am I going to do? How do I transition out of a sport? And I actually in 2019 came out to Adelaide. I came out there and I was coaching, and it was because obviously it's a place that I've been back so many times. I think I've done 7 summers now there, and I was putting stuff out on social media because I had been talking about my story, and my story, how I got into sport, was based around, and I've always said it wasn't about my talent, it wasn't about my ability, it was about my mindset. Because people listening, I have a condition called Poland syndrome. I'm missing my right pectoral muscle, 2 ribs behind it. I was told at birth that I shouldn't play sport, and it put me on the back foot quite a lot of times. So growing up, I was just constantly inundated with videos or stories about underdogs and people who could overcome adversity and make it in sport. And that's the thing that I just took on. And I absorbed that just as a player. So when I eventually managed to turn pro, I had done something that not many people had done in my sport, through using almost my mind and my ability to just find ways to become a pro, be elite when you kind of shouldn't have been. And then once I come into 2019, I'm retired and I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing. I just put out those stories, kind of like what we're doing now online. And the questions which naturally are from players, where they say, how do I bowl fast? How do I get stronger legs as a cricketer or a bowler? Like, what do I do? They suddenly shifted to, how do I build confidence? I've just had this game and I've lost. And how do I deal with that failure? How do I get into a professional setup? How do I overcome this person? They're playing better than me. And all these different questions. I was like, these questions are around mindset. These are nothing to do with sort of your on-ground performance that you almost might think of in terms of the skill sets or the physical attributes. And so I got really curious about it. My own podcast, I then decided to get guests on from the world of sport, ask them about their stories of mindset, what it took for them to get where they got. And then cheekily, when I started my master's, I thought, do you know what, as I'm reading literature, why don't I just get the authors of these research papers on? So I just started to build a library of researchers on there. And it then sort of evolved into the fact that people wanted me to mentor them. They wanted me to work with them as their mindset coach. And I love it now. Like, I really, really enjoy it, in terms of my goal is just to get players, which is kind of the definition of mindset, which is to get players to just see the world differently. And they will see it one way, and then it's trying to get them to have the mindset and the approach into what they do. And you mentioned mindfulness, and mindfulness plays a big role in what I did, because literally the year after I retired, I traveled to Hawaii, trained myself in meditation and yoga, and they were big roles for me in my own personal performance as an athlete. And now they're sort of a tool that I will use, which is backed up by the research, thankfully, to help players. So, yeah, it's a bit of a sort of walked into it, I guess, accidentally on purpose.
Yeah, your journey and your story's amazing, Lewis. And I see a lot of similarities between you and I in terms of our journey in education and then yoga, breath work, and then kind of pivoting back into doing some...
Were you a fast bowler as well, Jaimi?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, that's exactly
left
where
arm.
our similarities lied. No, not at all. And were you the netball player? Is that what it was? Yeah. Really sort of similar journeys there. So I know that a lot of what you do weaves in both the, sports psychology, education and literature, but also that really tangible skill of breath work, yoga and mindfulness and the intersection of those two things. So for those listening, I know it's a big topic and it's probably hard to really nail down, but could you just explain what mindfulness means to you and why you're so passionate about bringing that skill to athletes?
Well, mindfulness is essentially, if you think about it, I think the one thing people misunderstand is the difference between, say, like mindfulness and meditation. So mindfulness is, you want to think of it like the quality of your mind, right? So the same way, Sean, if you're training someone as a strength and conditioning coach, you're trying to get people to train to improve the quality of their body, their physical attributes that they have to do what they're doing. Mindfulness is that quality of mind that you're looking for. Meditation is the tool that gets you there. So it's the gym, it's the peak performance center that you go to and you use in order to get that quality of mind. And that quality of mind ultimately is trying to get yourself to be present. That's just really what we're talking about. And when I mean present, it is not thinking about anything that's happened in the past and not overthinking about anything that's going on in the future. So I've had a performance and it didn't go my way and I'm not dwelling on that. And also I'm not maybe getting overexcited or nervous about what could happen in the future. I am just dealing with what's here right now. I mean, any mindfulness book that you might read, like there might be someone talking about washing the dishes. It's like being there, washing the dishes, being present, doing it, not thinking about, what about that last one I washed? Or what about the one that I'm just about to wash? Like, no, like the one you've got right in your hands. So put it into a sporting context, it's the players that have that mindfulness approach. Again, I almost want to, mindfulness still comes with its own pieces of baggage, I think, sometimes, just because of how it's traditionally taught and where it's come from and its roots. But it is, if you're a footy player, if you're a cricketer, if you're a rugby player, it's playing the second that you're playing rather than playing the minutes that have gone or the minutes that are coming. And that, having that quality of mind is what you try to cultivate. So you usually find that anyone who struggles with their mindset or their mental focus or attention or attitude, if they're struggling with it, you can usually bring it down to the fact that they're in some form of the past or they're in some form of the future, and they're very rarely in the now. Because once you're then in that now and you are doing second by second, moment by moment, it sounds simple, but it's a very peaceful, it's a much more engaging, it's flow state, right? When if you really go into things like that, it's flow. It's exactly what you want to try and achieve. But all of the distractions that come from the world of sport or life, they rip you into those other two areas of the past or the future.
And it's a skill, right? I think I see a lot in yoga class or talking to athletes that they get really turned off. Like you said, it comes with that baggage or connotation that, I've tried one form of meditation once and all I could do was think about what I was going to have for dinner or think about what I've done in my day, so it's not for me and like I'm not good at it. But as you said, it is about cultivating that flow state, and it is a skill, exactly like on the gym floor. You're not just going to chuck a 200 kilo barbell on your shoulders and do a back squat if you've never done that before. It's, building that skill of mindfulness, and it's not about having a completely empty mind. It's about constantly noticing that maybe your mind isn't empty and using those tools in your tool belt to be able to be mindful in the moment. I
think most people have a default to go to mindlessness almost, whether, and I don't know whether this is, a generational thing. Obviously we haven't experienced previous generations, but whether it's as simple as like we've all been stuck in a doom scroll before, not thinking about things, or probably the other example I think from a mindlessness point of view is we've just moved house recently. How many times have you just been on autopilot and you start driving back to the house we were at for 6 years beforehand, and you're like, oh shit, I have to quickly do a Yui, and not thinking or being present in that moment and understanding what you need to do. One of the things that I love from you, Lewis, and I guess just to give those listening an understanding of how much I rate you, and this is not just a Lewis love session. I am here to pump your tires up a little bit, but we had an athlete here in Adelaide who I work very closely with from a physical standpoint, and they were looking for a mindset or psychological edge. And there honestly was nobody within Australia that I felt as confident as referring to Lewis, across the ditch all the way in the UK there. That athlete and that athlete's team ended up flying Lewis over for his 7th time over here, which we were super grateful for. But one of the things you said when you were here, when we were working together and we're trying to tie the physical and the mental together, and I had a wonderful time working with you. Now, I'd love to hear the specific reference and who you got this information or methodology or principle off of. But you said there was a time or some sort of strategy that you'd taken where there was an athlete or a coach, I think it was, who every time they performed a specific skill, they were so mindful and understanding that they knew exactly the reason why they misperformed or performed the skill correctly at any given point in time. So I think you talked about the fact, this person was a tennis player and they were, let's say it was served and the serve went, 2 centimeters to the left. And they knew exactly the reason why that was. And I love that. That was a really tangible thing. So going back and every single serve would go down, write notes, what happened there? Where did the ball land? What did it feel like as it came off of the racket? Where did it feel like my shoulder went? And we did that. It was so repetitious. By the end, there was just such a mindful understanding of the reason. I just thought so many athletes could benefit from that sort of mindset and that process and that strategy. Because there are so many times we would just sort of go through the motions, the ball sprays off the side of your foot, oh, well, whatever, I'll stuff that one up. I'll get to the next one. Do you remember that instance? And can you remember where you got that methodology
from? I know exactly
from?
what you're talking about. I know exactly what you're talking about. So this, I think the way to contextualize a lot of what I do as well, and this is why with my branding, you'll see it's all branded Mind Strong, because coming back to this kind of mindfulness conversation is that my belief, and this is probably a bigger, larger conversation around mental health, is that we in society have been talking about mental health, whether it's in sport, whether it's in life, and we've been talking about, we've not really been making it better. And I think it's also because we've been using it as a reason for people to remove themselves from the stresses that are in front of them. Now, we have to be careful when we do that, because the stresses that are in front of people sometimes are actually good for them, and they're actually what you need to engage with. And also, you can't bloody well get away from them, just because life will hit you with stresses. So what my approach has been, that the reason why we might see more people are struggling with those stresses is because of exposure, lack of exposure to it. And the Mind Strong sort of ethos is that life or sport doesn't really care about your feelings or what's going on. It cares about how you show up to it. And so you have to be mentally stronger in order to deal with that. Now, that's not like a win at all cost mentality. It's just, have I got the skills to be able to deal with the challenge in front of me? Doesn't mean I'm going to win, doesn't mean I'm going to succeed, but can I deal with that? And so that's just to contextualize sort of my approach going into this. So when I go into, say, this scenario and this sort of exercise that you're talking about with an athlete, this particular one is really based around how we get athletes to perform under pressure. So it's how we get them to execute their skill under pressure. And I was very fortunate to work with a world-class performance psych in the UK, and he came in and worked with us in cricket, and it was all about how you had an understanding of your skill. So did I not only know where my wrist position was when I was letting go of the ball as a cricketer, but did I know like which finger was holding on to which particular seam of the ball? And that's not, again, for some form of mindfulness exercise, while it is kind of the mechanism that gets you there thrown in under the carpet, what it's really about is a sense of control. And the reason you want that is because any anxiety, frustration, pressure that you feel in sport is ultimately you feeling that you want to control something that you can't control, but you want to control it, right? So you've got something you can't control, you want to control it, but you can't, and that will create pressure, anxiety, stress, fatigue, whatever. So if you think of it in this scenario where it might be something like a serve in tennis, right? If you're feeling nervous or you're feeling pressure, yes, the world around you is chaotic, like there's all sorts of internal and external pressures that are going on. But ultimately, there are a few things that you'll be able to nail down to execute that serve. Now, a serve in tennis is actually arguably one of them. It's a very complicated closed skill because you've got the ball toss. There's variations of that. Wind even comes into it. So it's a moving target, and you've got to hit it. But you're stationary. It's not like hitting a golf ball, even though golf is incredibly difficult. But it's about having a player to stand there on the line, on the service line, and think only a few things, and be able to execute those knowing they have a very good data set, which is from their training of, I know if I do this, this, and this, then I'm going to get X outcome, or the chances of that happening increase massively. But what usually gets in the way of players is while they'll have those three things, it could be they might think about ball tossing with a palm facing up, right, like a dinner plate. They might then think about their arm being towards 12 or 1 o'clock, but then they'll have an idea of like, where am I having a contact point? And the exercise really is about taking a skill, whatever it is that you want to perform under pressure. It's usually some form of a closed skill. So this worked really well in goal kicking in AFL, tennis, cricket's really good because, again, golf, because they're closed. Like soccer, is an environment where the ball's obviously it's open play, so there's a lot more variables going on, so it's a little bit more complicated to do. But ultimately, it's breaking down that skill. What are really important things for you that allow you to get the success that you want? And then can we simplify it into a few words so that when you execute that skill, you're standing on the line and there's pressure and it's Wimbledon match point, whilst you've got all of the expectations and the fears and the worries or the crowd noise or the opposition, the fatigue in the body, and all of that noise is screaming at you, you can pick out those three things or whatever it might be that you've trained over and over and over again, and you just focus on that. And that is where you hear these players that have skills and execute them and perform under pressure. You'll always hear them talk about when a mic is shoved in their face at the end of a tournament. How did you deal with the pressure? How could you deal with all those people watching you? And they'll usually say, I didn't really see it, didn't really hear it. I was so focused on the process that's what they do. And that's what we're talking about. It's really this process that they can focus on. And all of that is again, it's backed up in the literature. It's what you will find out there in the psychological space. But I think it's ultimately, how do you teach it? Like, how do you transfer that across to a player?
On that, it's interesting. I'd like to ask you, a colleague of ours, Dr. Martin Imick, I've had some chats with him around skill acquisition and mindfulness in the research, and it actually does show that if you're teaching somebody mindfulness, let's say an athlete that's been performing the same sport for all their life or 10 to 15 years, that when you actually ask them to be mindful about something, that they can actually be worse to start with, that their performance goes backwards because you're breaking down that natural flow process that they've just lent on for years, and that puts people off of mindfulness because they go, hang on a minute, this is actually making me worse. Aren't I supposed to be getting better? So have you observed that, and how do you sort of explain that to athletes?
Yeah, so there's a theory called reinvestment theory, which is essentially, if you think about it, that there's a learning continuum that happens. Is at the very start of you learning a skill. Think about you riding a bike when you were a kid, right? When you're learning a new skill, it's a very clunky process. It's what's called a cognitive stage. It's very clunky. You're learning all the very early stages of it, and you're getting it wrong. You're falling over, but you don't kind of know how you're doing that, and you're trying to learn that, and someone guide you, but you'll do it. Again, it might be kicking a football. You'll be really clunky at it to begin with. You'll be thinking about, where's my hip, my knee, my foot, like where's the ball? I'm trying to track it and all that sort of stuff. But then eventually, through practice, you move into what's called an associative stage, which again, if you think about riding a bike, you're eventually like riding it, you might fall off, but you can start to adjust and figure out how you're getting that wrong, and you sort of self-coach, and you understand the rights, the wrongs, the good, best ways, the better ways, and you do that. But then eventually practice will get you to what's called an autonomous stage, which is where you're doing it without thinking about it. again. So if you were to Google images of Roger Federer's forehand, you'll literally find like an image that is identical on all his forehands, right? Like he's just doing it without thinking about it because he's done it over and over again. But the interesting thing about reinvestment theory, it's based around pressure, is that if you add pressure, people tend to slide back down that continuum. And the example I will give is driving a car. Is if you drive a car, the first day you learn to drive a car, you think you're literally driving a spaceship. Like the first time you've ever done it, you're like, where's the gear stick? What pedals? What's going on? If you've got a clutch involved, like, oh my God. And then again, as you learn to drive, you get better, right? You start to go, oh, stalled the car. No, that's how I do it, and you get it. And then eventually, you're driving, like you said earlier, you're driving to places where you don't even think about where you're going. Like you're moving the gear stick, you got your hands, you've maybe got one hand on the steering wheel. Like you're just chilling. It's absolutely fine because you've done it so many times. But now let's say you're going to a local supermarket, you're about to park the car, and you're about to reverse into it, and suddenly an 18-wheeler comes steaming up behind you, and there's a bloke in there, he's angry, he's honking a horn, you've got a friend in the car with you saying, hurry up, Jamie, come on, get into the car, get into space, speed up. And suddenly you're panicking, like, you'll be really aware of where your hands are, there's gear stick, you might fumble the gear stick, you might move around. You've suddenly slid down that learning continuum, right? You've gone into a really cognitive stage, you've reverted back to it. So this exercise I was talking about how you get players to perform under pressure, is that if you can get players to have maybe 1, 2, or 3 things to recognize in that moment, that when that pressure's on and you can feel like you're overthinking, you feel like you're sliding down the continuum, that you can ground yourself on these 3 things that within it is a bunch of information, but it's simplified into just one word. It's like driving the car. It's like steering wheel, gear stick, pedals. It's like that. You're not thinking about where is everything going and, oh my God, the speed at which I'm doing it, whatever. You've just got those 3 things focused on. And in the chaos of everything, you can take a breath, you can just focus on those and do that. Now that takes training, right? That takes putting someone under pressure, putting someone in a scenario like that where they have to feel that sense of chaos within them or outside of them, and then try to problem solve that. And so that's pretty much, my favorite part of training some of the athletes I work with is putting them under this insane pressure. And I only have that because I actually experienced it when I was, whether it was in Adelaide or in the professional game. And so not only it's quite cool that I know this in sort of literature, but also how it practically happens. And yeah, that's the skill acquisition side of things. I'll just say is probably a different, it's its own element. So you will move, but you want to, in skill acquisition, you're moving people from that cognitive, associative to autonomous. But then if you're learning a new skill, you'll kind of like restart that process again, or come back down for it. If someone remodels their swing in golf and things like that, they're moving back down that continuum, which is why when you get a player that is changing something, they're changing a technique, it's tough to put them under pressure because they haven't learned those, whether it's 3 things, or they haven't practiced enough to make it feel autonomous, to make it feel automatic in what they're doing. So yeah, it's an ever-growing process.
Mate, I love that analogy. That's unreal. I want to sort of touch back on a point that I heard a little while back. You mentioned, I guess, that exposure to stressful situations or things that potentially could create adaptation. And I love that because I think there is a continuum. And I certainly don't want to be one of those guys where, back in my day, back in the 90s, we used to be out like on our hands and knees in the gravel playing in the dirt and, we're tougher and those sorts of things. But I do think that maybe nowadays we can be a little bit too protective in a number of circumstances, whether it's athletically. But I'm going to put my hand up here and say there was a bad parenting moment, but I think it sort of fits in really well to sort of your exposure example. We went to Jaimi knows straight away. We went to a parent information night at our daughter's school about a fortnight ago, actually. So it was really recent, so it was very poignant. This lady was a wonderful presenter, and she sort of mentioned the fact that it is okay for your child to fail. It's okay for them to be upset. It's okay for your child to be uncomfortable, because we have a tendency to want to protect them at all times. And, I thought about that. And I rewound, and, Jaimi and I have been together a long time. And I remember when we first met her.
He's really just justifying why he beat our 5-year-old in a game.
Well,
Let's cut to the chase.
her brother was 10 years old. I used to flog him at everything all the time until he got to like 16. Then I stopped playing him, and Jaimi was like, "Why don't you be nicer to him?" I said, "Nah, I'm going to make him a better person." Fast forward to having kids, I let Matilda win everything. Like, I literally let her win anything. We've gone to this information night. I thought, you know what? From here on in, it's going to be okay. She can lose a few things. Anyway, 2 days later, she goes, Daddy, can we have a race out the back? I was like, all right, here we go. I flogged her 5 times in a row, just absolutely doing laps around the. She came storming in, bawling her eyes out. Jamie's like, what have you done to our daughter? She obviously has no resilience at all because I've been letting her win. Do you have, I guess, a sweet spot or some sort of algorithm or of, you know, how much is enough exposure to failure and discomfort? You know, how many laps or how many sessions around the snake pit is appropriate versus periodized and prescribed programming, you know, from a mindset perspective anyway?
Short answer is no, because you have to remember something when you're talking about the mind, when you're talking about something psychological, it's unlike the literature in strength and conditioning, because that is an objective, scientifically proven thing, but also with still some variance within it. Whereas when you're talking about the mind, it's purely subjective. So you might have one player that just needs one event, and then they've built a hardened level of resilience to a certain level of exposure. You might have someone who has to have repeated exposure to it. Now, there is, in my experience, and I think you're right, when we talk about generations, it's really, really tough to not sit there like you're with your rocking chair and like Python saying these kids aren't built like they used to. But there is an element to actually that there being some truth in that. There is some truth in that, and I think athletes have to have a level of accountability into how much they want to have this exposure into what they're doing. I heard this quote saying, "You can't mental health your way out of accountability," and I think we've kind of got to a stage where that's happened, and that happens in sport a little bit, where there is a huge. Don't get me wrong. The thing that is challenging for young players, especially, is that they're growing up in a world that I would never really have had exposure into. I think when I first came out to Adelaide when I was 18 and flew all the way out when I was 18, the only way I could communicate with my family at that time was an email or a text message to just say, like, I hadn't been bitten by a redback or eaten by a shark, right? And I think now it's like I could FaceTime my parents and it'd almost be there as if they're in that room in Adelaide with me. And it's a completely different level of a technological world that they're growing up in, and that's come with its benefits and its challenges. But I think one of them is a few things. There's this, what I see in sport is this feeling of I don't want to put myself out there to look like I am going to fail, and that happens. You'll be surprised that it even happens at the professional level, but that might be coming from some form of ego protection and self-image that they're trying to create. I actually had on the podcast Chris Massagno. He's actually in the University of Victoria, and he's a big researcher. He'd been a huge researcher in anxiety, performing under pressure, and we'd spoken about like self-presentation, and it was this idea of like athletes have this image that they try to uphold, and sometimes when you're put under pressure, you try to protect that image and you do things that are out of the norm. But when it comes to training, I do kind of have a bit of prescription to it. So I have a bit of a method in which I think of it. And I like to think of it in terms of how you might train a marathon runner, for example. So if you're a marathon runner, you know that a runner will not run every session, like a threshold session or an interval session to like balls to the wall, go as hard as you can. They will run 5 times a week at easy pace, really what they call as Kenyan shuffle, where it looks like they're just trotting along. They can talk to you. It's a low RPE. It's zone 2 training for majority of their training. But then one session a week will be a threshold, will be an interval that will stretch them. It will push them beyond that. And then they'll go back into their 5 days of easy running. But I kind of think about that for the mind, right? You don't want every session to be this intense pressurized exposure where you're trying to really, really stress them, because every session will just become not only systemically fatiguing on the body, but overall psychologically fatiguing. And you might disengage. You might think you're no good. You might not feel like you're getting any progress. So I tend to think if you're an athlete and you're training, let's say just 5 days a week, I would say you want to have one of those sessions is where it's putting you under the pump. It's really stressing you. It's some form of pressure that you're putting into your training so that you understand where the skills that you're trying to work on actually are going to be effective in a game. It's no good, and I see this a lot in athletes, just being in the comfort of a training facility where there's no pressure, things are going well, you're nailing your skill, you're getting everything right. Let's say you're a tennis player and you're getting all your serves right, but you're doing it with no one around you looking at you. There's no peer pressure, there's no judgment, there's no consequence, there's no fatigue in it. It's just super easy. And then you're met with having to do it in the third set on a match point, and you can't do it because you've got all this pressure. You've never experienced it before. And the real thinking of it is kind of like train hard, play easy, right? That's you hear it all the time, but it really is true. And to tell you what, I did this with a tennis player recently, right? I got him we were doing it about serve. So this is what it kind of looks like. His Monday to Friday would have looked like he was working on a serve, but I got him to work on just one serve. So whether it was his flat serve, his slice serve, or his kick serve, whatever it might be. And then be really specific, like which side are you going to hit it? You're going to hit it from the juice side or the ad side. And then you can do both, but you're only going to hit one serve, and then you're only going to aim it at one part of the service spot. So you're going to go T, are you going to go body, or you're going to go wide? So you've got there's all these variations they can hit. But many players will just go to a training session and they'll hit everything. It's like going to a driving range and taking every club and hitting every club twice, rather than just taking one and getting really good at one and then coming to training next day, use the next one. So I said to him, right, on Monday, you'll hit this serve and figure out those three things that you're trying to work on, those three things that make that serve, that particular serve. Take a journal, please, so that you remind yourself what it is that you're doing. And then come back to it, do your other training session, which might be a bit more match play, a bit more open court work on Tuesday. You'll have some physical work. Wednesday, serve again. Do the same serve. See if you can revisit what you did on Monday, see if you start to nail it. Do Thursday might be, again, more open court play. But then on Friday, I got him to do a session where I said, if you can, bring an exercise bike down from the gym. And if you can put it on the court. And he couldn't. I said, okay, well, we'll grab a skipping rope or a mat. And he couldn't get a bike. And what we got him to do was, he was going to hit that same serve that he had done on Wednesday and Monday. But he is going to now serve twice, do it twice, jump off the court, do 30 seconds of burpees, rest for 30 seconds, then do another 30 seconds of burpees, and then jump back on court, take the 25 seconds that you would need in between serves, and then serve again. And the reason we use fatigue in this instance, the bike was ideal because it wouldn't have worked his arms, so it wasn't ideal, but it was effective. And all it was because in order to create pressure, this stress, there's really four things that you can go for. There's peer pressure, so the idea of your peers watching you and that pressure. Consequence, if I fail, something's going to happen. So it might be a bet, it might be jumping in an ice bath, or like doing some sort of consequence that you don't want to happen, or getting a reward, get some sort of reward. Judgment, so a coach will looking at you, someone's eyes that you value, and you don't want to have that. It's kind of linked with peer pressure. The last one, fatigue, which is really easy. Like fatigue someone, and that will create chaos in the mind. And so that's what we did. This session, stressed it. And I just said, in this session, you're going to fail, you're going to get things wrong. But what I want you to try and do is aim at these three things that you've been working on Monday and Wednesday, and see if you can execute them when you're under pressure. Take that moment to breathe. Take that moment to understand what's going on. And that is him learning from that exposure. And then at the end of that session, we just review it. And I say to him, what did you learn? Where did your mind wander to? Where did you go to? What was it that what excuses were you making for yourself? What did you want to give up at some stage? Like, where was it? And then when that happens, when that tension is happening, can you remind yourself, take a breath, go back to those three things? And how you do that is individual. It might be taking that breath. It might be saying it to yourself. It might be having it written on your forearm so that you know it's there. And that is that's how I've found that you can kind of get it. So prescription being, I'd always like to say, like in 7 days, you're at least doing one so that you're testing where you're at. But it's really systematic into how you do it, because then from a skill acquisition point of view or development, whatever you learn on that Friday, you assess, you review, and you either move on to the next thing next Monday and you do it, the process again, or you just go again. But I think that's where athletes get it wrong. One, they don't do that session, and two, they try to do everything and get nothing.
Amazing. Love it.
Yeah, I love it, Lewis. And I think this topic is so interesting, and there's so many different avenues you can go down, and you have so much amazing information to share on that. I'd like to just steer the conversation in a slightly different direction to finish off. We asked our community in terms of mindset and mindfulness and sport performance, what were some things that they really wanted to hear about. And something that came up, and I do hear and see this a lot just in general conversations, and it's very timely, is around retiring or transitioning out of elite sport, or even, I guess, our motto is closing the gap between local and elite. So even if you're not an elite athlete, I guess whatever performance and being elite means to you. So, you know, people take their local sport very, very seriously, and it's their whole entire being. So, yeah, I guess you can share where you're at with your journey in that, and what advice you have for people who are, I guess, at that point in their career.
Yeah, very timely. Just because on Saturday I officially bowled my last ball in cricket, and I decided that this was going to be my last year playing. So I was coming off the back of one of the most emotional weekends I think I've ever experienced, and I actually have a therapist myself. It was one thing I brought into my world 2 years ago. One, because of the work I'm doing, I wanted to make sure that I'm in a good space to be able to help others. But also, I had realised that I had some things that from professional sport that hadn't been dealt with really, and I don't think I'd explored it. I gave him one job. I was like, I want to feel my emotions more. That's what I want to feel. And so I definitely felt those on Saturday. And having spoken to him again this week, because I wanted to unpack what happened, we spoke about it being like a grief that you go through. And it is a unique grief, the way I described it, because I said grief when you lose someone, whether it's they physically left this space, or you've had a relationship breakup, whatever it is. Sometimes you have not controlled that, you have not created that, and that might be a little bit easier to deal with. But this unique grief that you have when you're transitioning out of sport, you've chosen to leave, or you are leaving, you can, depending on how you've gone out. In my instance, I've chosen that grief. I've placed that grief onto myself, because technically I could play again next year. Physically, I'm probably capable. I wouldn't be able to play at the level I always want to forever. But you still can go roll your arm over and play. So the analogy I use, it's like you're trying to close a door, but the door's broken and it will never close. And so it's kind of dealing with that. And how I'm coming to wrestle with it, and I by no means have the final answer, and I don't even know if there is one, because at the end of the day, my sort of view is a bit of an existentialist view, which is the toughness that you feel, the situation being hard, that is life. Like that is ultimately, like we are faced with some sort of challenge or situation that we aren't going to like. But do I have the capacities to be able to deal with it? Yeah, I'm pretty sure I do. And I think that is where, if you can get yourself in a space where you think, I don't want this on me, or I don't like this scenario, it may not feel good, but can I deal with it? Yeah, usually you can. Most people can. And if you can look at it in that way, or the way I'm starting to look at it as more like a chapter, being more of a chapter. And I really love the framework of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. So if you don't know it, it's pretty much the baseline of any heroes film that you ever think. So think Luke Skywalker, Harry Potter, or Frodo in Lord of the Rings. The storyline has many different parts, but there's three main things, which is there's this call to adventure at the start, which is Luke Skywalker finds out he's a Jedi, or Frodo's been given the ring, go to Mordor. And then you have the second part, the three parts, which is the initiation. And along the way, that is where you meet you're met with trials and tribulations and successes, but you meet guides and mentors along the way, and there's these crucible moments that happen in your life, and the guides that take you there, and the friends. So for Frodo, it's Samwise, it's Legolas, it's Gimli, it's all those guys there. But for Luke Skywalker, it's R2-D2, it's Han Solo. Those guys, their support, the mentors, the guides. And then finally, the return is that hero comes back to where they begun, but they come back different. but they're also a different person. But the adventure starts again. So Frodo returns back to the Shire. Luke Skywalker comes back to Tatooine. Harry Potter returns. Well, I actually never watched Harry Potter, so I don't want to spoil it for that. But the point being is that those heroes return, but they're different, and then their adventure starts again. But you've learned lessons from that past. You've had scars, you've had wins, and you've learned a lot about yourself. And whatever that next adventure, whatever that call to adventure is, you take whatever you've had from that last one onto the next one. So I think of it like that. I think of it kind of like this adventure that I'm now going on to, armed with everything that professional sport in general has armed me with. And I wrote it in what I said about sport in general was, and I spoke to my team and my club at the end, and I said I honestly didn't really care too much about what I achieved or the trophies, the accolades, the wins, because the most important thing for me when I started sport was being recognised for how I played the game. And that is fully in my control. That's fully about me as a person. That's fully about me. It's nothing to do with the 5 wickets, the runs or anything like that. It's how did I play the game? And could that have a positive impact on whether it's the people around me, but not only that, just myself, even from a selfish point of view, can I just have a positive impact on how I move on with my life, whatever it is? And sport, I think, is no better place to do that, because sport is just an exaggerated format of everyday life events, and you if you can deal with that, then you can deal with anything.
I saw you wrote something on your post about that sometimes things are bigger than sport, and I think that was ties into what you just said nicely there, is about, you're going to have wins and losses, and you're going to mourn that loss of maybe not being able to physically perform at the sport that you love, but maybe reflecting and taking away on the relationships you've made, or like you said, the mentors, or some of those, thinking about those positive things that you've learnt that you can take with you in your character post-sport that can positively impact your life, I think is another really good thing to potentially reflect on.
Yeah, well, I was talking. Sorry, I was just talking about that moment. I didn't play sport to end it. I didn't play it for the last ball. I didn't play it for the last match. It's like what I wrote there and mentioned was, you don't listen to music for the last note. You don't watch a film for the last scene. You watch it for the entirety of it. But then the other thing is that there's always there will be another song that you get to go and enjoy. There's another film that you get to go and enjoy. And then that's the thing that I think, if you're coming out of sport or transitioning, like, that's something to remind yourself, is that was one song, that was one film, that was one journey. There's another one that you're going into, and it can be just as good.
I think the last half an hour has shown everybody the reason why I rate you so highly, mate. The way you articulate your message is second to none, and I think you are very correct in saying that this is just the start of your journey. I can't wait to see where life post-sport takes you. I think that it's going to sort of drag you back in, but obviously in a much different role now, and I'm hoping that we get to cross paths again very soon. But I really appreciate that. There's so many golden nuggets that we can take out of that, and that our community, I think, are going to absolutely love.
Just quickly before we wrap up, how can our community find out a bit more about what you do, and maybe potentially use your resources if they're interested?
Yeah, so head over to just Instagram is really easy. Like, I've got a bunch of things going on. So at Lewis Hatchett there, lewishatchett.com is my website. And then Mindstrong Sport is both linked at that site, but it's at Mindstrong Sport and mindstrongsport.com. We've been meaning to do it, but let's set up a link with us guys and what we're doing to see if we can benefit the community there. But yeah, I've got some cool little things that athletes can gather and use, whether it's free or some stuff that's paid and subscribe based. But if there's an athlete out there that wants to improve how they think about their game, their life, then yeah, that's where I'm at.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. We really appreciate it, Lewis.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
So there you have it, our chat with Lewis Hatchett. I thought he brought some great insights into how mindfulness for training can assist with your performance, and also how much is just enough stressor to assist us in becoming more resilient.